dust curled in the golden shaft of evening light, slanting through the narrow studio window. Elliot sat cross-legged on the worn rug, arms buried to the elbows in a cardboard box reeking of mildew and attic rot. The box had arrived unannounced, without a return address, wrapped in brown paper, and bound with twine knotted like a noose. No note inside, just 5 vinyl records in crumbling sleeves, their labels faded and titles handwritten in looping Cyrillic script. His subscribers would eat this up. Rare Soviet-era LPs. Let's see what nightmares they sound like. Clickbait practically wrote itself. He smirked, but the mirth didn't touch his eyes. There was something about the records, something in the way the cardboard felt almost damp, as if it had recently been underground. He chose the one with symbol scrawled where the title should be, a sun split down the middle by a jagged line, like a wound. The grooves were deep, the black surface nearly mirror slick. When he dropped the needle, the speakers crackled with a hiss like dead air. Then came a low, tremulous drone. At first, it sounded like stretched cello strings, or perhaps the moan of wind through a crypt. Elliot leaned back, slipping on his studio headphones to capture the audio clean. That's when he heard it. Faint, almost hidden beneath the surface noise. A melody. Women's voices, maybe 4 or 5, weaving around one another in a wavering harmony. The lyrics were unintelligible, sung in a tongue he didn't recognize, the syllables harsh and raw like bone against stone. He froze. The track wasn't in stereo, but the voices, they moved, swirling from one ear to the other, breathing words just below comprehension. One voice stood out, lower, slower. A woman's tone, close, like a whisper against the skin. It didn't match the rest. It wasn't part of the recording. He yanked off the headphones. Silence. The room looked the same. Guitar on its stand, blinking monitors, coffee gone cold. And yet, everything felt displaced by a fraction, like a room seen in a dream, familiar, but wrong. That night, while editing the audio, he noticed something strange. The waveforms on the screen didn't match the sounds he'd heard. In the quiet spaces between notes, there were spikes. He zoomed in. What he found shouldn't have been there. Brief, rhythmic pulses that resembled a voice speaking or chanting. A sense of pressure built in his skull. He went back to the raw file, isolated the whispering layer, filtered it. The words that surfaced made his skin crawl, not because he understood them, but because his body did. His gut recoiled, his mouth went dry. There were syllables that made his tongue twitch against his teeth just to hear them. He didn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw a circle of hooded figures around a fire, their faces blurred, their mouths open in that same twisted song. By morning, he convinced himself it was stress. Lack of sleep, too much caffeine. He'd upload a teaser and move on. But when he stepped into his studio, the record player was spinning again, and no one had touched it. Elliot stood motionless at the doorway, heart thrumming behind his ribs like a second pulse. The record spun in slow, steady circles, the tone arm resting exactly where he'd left it the night before. But the needle, it shouldn't have been moving. He crossed the room, every step strangely muffled, as if the carpet had thickened overnight. The light outside had a grayish cast, more like early dust in morning. He stopped the turntable, lifted the needle, and placed the vinyl back into its sleeve with shaking hands. Then he noticed the smell. Burnt sage and copper. Faint but unmistakable. It wasn't incense. Elliot knew the scent of that well enough. This was different, older, a memory wrapped in heat and something acrid, metallic. The audio still sat open on his computer. The waveform, like a quiet scream, stretched over 6 minutes. He hadn't touched it since isolating the whispers. Last night, he'd managed to transcribe 2 of the phrases the deeper voice repeated, although he didn't recognize the language. Something about them felt rhythmic, ritualistic. The syllables stuck in his throat when he tried to repeat them aloud. He emailed the clip to a linguist friend, Lena, a folklorist with a knack for forgotten dialects. She replied faster than expected. "You're messing with something very old. This isn't Russian or any Slavic root I know. Sounds pre-Christian, maybe Finno-Ugric, but warped. I'm getting undertones of Sami Yoiks. But there's something off, like a ritual meant to transform the singer. Where did you find this?" He didn't reply. Not right away, because he just noticed something on the waveform he hadn't seen before. A second layer beneath the chants. Fainter. He boosted the levels, added filters. There was, buried almost beyond recognition, a single word spoken just once. His name. Soft, wet, as though formed by lips that hadn't moved in centuries. Elliot. He staggered back from the desk, bile rising in his throat. This isn't possible. It's a trick of the brain. Auditory pareidolia. I'm projecting. But his hands were shaking. He knew what hallucinations felt like. He'd had panic attacks before. This wasn't that. This was external, rooted in something real and something ancient. That night, the dreams began again. He stood on a frozen plain under a red sky. A choir of faceless women stood in a circle, chanting in perfect unison. In the center, a blindfolded figure writhed, arms outstretched, throat torn open. His heart pounded in recognition. The body was his own. He woke with a scream lodged in his chest and blood on his sheets. Not much, just a smear across the pillowcase. His nose, maybe, he told himself that. But his headphones were on the floor, and the record was spinning again. When he finally answered Lena's email, he kept it brief. It came in the mail. No return address. Just a box. You were right. Something's not right with it. Her response arrived an hour later. Destroy it. I'm serious. These kinds of rituals weren't meant to be recorded. They were passed in blood, not song. If that's really your name in there, they're not singing to you, Elliot. They're singing for you. He stared at the words, stomach a pit of lead. Then the power went out. Silence blanketed the room like a tomb. From a headphones lying on the floor came a sound. No power, no battery. But there it was, faint, humming. And behind it, a woman's voice, crooning something soft and hollow, as though the earth itself were singing. He has heard the song. Now we remember him. The next morning, Elliot packed the record in a thick plastic sleeve, wrapped in foil, and sealed it inside a heavy box lined with salt. He didn't know why he did any of that. It wasn't logic. It was instinct. The kind of primal, animal panic that told your body to act before your mind understood what it feared. He placed the box on a shelf in the hallway closet, buried beneath winter coats and old gear he hadn't touched in years. Then he tried to forget. He made coffee. He showered. He opened his email, ignoring Lena's latest message. When he launched his editing software, the last session opened automatically. The waveform stared back at him like a scar. He deleted it, emptied the trash, restarted the machine. But when he opened his music folder, the file was still there. He didn't double-click it. He didn't have to, because it started playing on its own. His speakers remained silent, but the song was in the walls, in the floorboards, in the spaces between breath and thought. It wasn't just sound anymore, it was presence, a weight behind his eyes, a rhythm in his bones. He clutched his temples, teeth clenched, the pressure unbearable. Then the voices came again, not as whispers this time, but as echoes through a long corridor of memory. They weren't dreams anymore. He saw a cavern lined with candles, the ceiling lost in shadow, a stone altar, a woman with no face but a mouth, endlessly open. She sang as her hands tore feathers from a black bird's wings. The vision shattered as someone pounded on his door. He opened it to find Lena standing in the hallway, wind-blown and pale. I tried calling, she said. You didn't answer. He looked down. His phone sat in his hand. No missed calls. She stepped inside, took one look at him, and said, You haven't slept in days. I don't think I'm awake now, he muttered. They sat in silence for a long while. Lena's hands curled around a cup of untouched tea. Her eyes flicked to the hallway closet. You still have it? He nodded. You have to destroy it. Fire, acid, whatever it takes. These kinds of rituals. Elliot, they weren't music. They were maps. Maps to what? To memory, but not yours. She leaned in. You've let it in. That's what the voices are. Echoes of something that remembers being worshipped. That remembers sacrifice. The song's not cursed. It's alive. You're the instrument now. He laughed. Too loudly, the sound hollow in the quiet room. Then why hasn't it just killed me? Lena hesitated. Because it needs you to listen. She pulled something from her bag, a faded book, its pages fragile and yellowed. A journal, maybe? She flipped to a hand-drawn diagram of a ritual circle, nearly identical to the symbols etched on the record sleeve. I found this in the university's archive. It talks about a cult from the northern Urals, the Daughters of the Hollow Voice. They believed songs could resurrect memory, not in the poetic sense. Literally. She pointed to a passage written in tight Cyrillic. They said memory was a god, and if enough people sang its name, it would wake up, it would remember its body, its followers, its hunger. Elliot stared at the page, eyes unfocused. Somewhere in his head, the chant had resumed, faint but steady. The same melody, looping behind Lena's words like a second conversation. He stood suddenly, moving toward the closet. "Don't," she said, but he already had the box in his hands. "I just need to hear it one more time," he whispered, barely aware of his own voice. "Then maybe I'll understand." Elliot placed a record gently onto the turntable, his fingers trembling not with fear now, but with something closer to reverence. The room had darkened, though the blinds were open and morning light should have been spilling in. Lena stood behind him, silent, her breath shallow. She didn't try to stop him. Maybe she understood that something had already begun and needed finishing. The needle dropped, and the song began. At first it was the same, the low drone, the wavering harmony of voices not quite human, as if the wind itself had learned to grieve. The ancient language rose, syllables curling around the air like smoke. But this time, Elliot didn't flinch. He closed his eyes and listened. He listened through the sound. The panic receded. The dizziness faded. In its place came clarity, like waking from fever. The voices no longer haunted. They guided. For the first time, he heard not menace, but mourning. Not summoning, but memory. And then he understood. They weren't calling something back. They were letting it go. He saw them, women in tattered robes, standing in a frozen forest under a bleeding moon. Their mouths moved with sorrow, not devotion. They sang because they had to bind what had once broken loose. To remember, yes, but also to bury. The song was never meant for power. It was meant for closure. The God they had feared, this memory that hungered for flesh and worship, was already dead. But their songs kept its ghost tethered, replaying the terror like a broken ritual on loop. Each time someone listened without understanding, they awakened the echo of something that should never have been remembered. But now Elliot heard the final verse. It had always been missing, cut off, skipped, perhaps silenced by those who feared it too much. But on this playthrough, the record didn't stop where it always had. It continued. A new harmony joined the rest. Lena's voice. Somehow, impossibly, it wove into the recording, low, calm, ancient. Her lips weren't moving, but her voice was there, guiding the melody to a close. A final note rang out, impossibly long. It filled the room, the building his chest, then faded. Not abruptly, not violently, but gently, like the last light of dusk slipping below the horizon. And then, silence. Not the heavy, suffocating silence that had haunted him for days, but clean, open stillness. The kind you hear after snowfall, or in the breath between heartbeats when fear leaves a body. The record stopped spinning. Elliot opened his eyes. The room was warm, real. Light poured through the windows. The air no longer tasted of rust and ash, but of dust and coffee. Ordinary things. Lena exhaled shakily and looked at him. "It's over," she whispered. He nodded. They burned the record that afternoon in a rusted fire pit behind the building. It hissed and popped, curling in on itself, but it didn't scream. There was no shadow rising from the flames, no final cry, just the smell of melting vinyl and relief. Later, Elliot sat at his desk and opened a fresh audio file. No ghosts this time, no layered whispers, just silence waiting to be shaped. He named the project The Last Verse, not for views, not for fame, but because sometimes the only way to break a song's curse is to give a proper ending. And because deep down he knew Some echoes are not meant to be forgotten, but they can be forgiven.